Hello and welcome to another Water Cooler Wednesday. My name is Taylor Zork, and today we're going to be talking about the upcoming, or I think it's actually started, they're doing jury selection right now, fraud trial with SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, with relationship to the FTX collapse and kind of his involvement and potential fraudulent activity within FTX. So I've talked a lot about this subject just because this was all happening in November of last year, November of 2022. Right when we kind of launched Crypto CFO, so I was doing a lot of reporting on this back then, and it's super interesting just from a number of standpoints. One, just the scale of it. I believe that FTX was about a $32 billion organization between its minglings with Alameda Research and FTX, and to think that it collapsed, in such a kind of glorious fashion. We had John J. Ray III, who is now the CEO of FTX through the bankruptcy proceedings. He was saying that this is, absolutely unprecedented. It's the largest kind of oversight that he's seen. There was no corporate governance in FTX at all. So really, really unprecedented stuff here. And I think this all stems from the fact that it was essentially a bunch of kids living together as roommates in the Bahamas that were kind of built something that was bigger than they could have comprehended. And I think that I'm not diminishing the blame that they hold for this, but I think that at the same time, they were young kids that were just, I don't think they were setting out to build something as big as they actually ended up building. Stacey and I were just talking about this, and do I think that there's likely kind of fraud in here? Yes, but I also think that it was just something that snowballed bigger than any of them could have initially anticipated. So let's just talk a little bit about the backstory first about how FTX collapsed, and then we'll kind of get into what some of the allegations are and what we might expect to see in this fraud case. So back on November 6th of 2022, Binance, which was a rival exchange to FTX, sold all of their FTT tokens. So FTT was the native token of the FTX exchange, and it effectively gave you discounts on the services and the trading fees that you could utilize through the exchange. So it's kind of like coupons to a store, right? They have some tangible value, but they're not crazy liquid, and if the exchange doesn't exist, they don't have any value, right? So one of the big problems with FTX is that they were valuing the entire supply of these FTT tokens at their face value. And so they had this huge balance sheet that they were then leveraging to get loans on. So it's like if you're Stop and Shop and you have these, coupons to get discounts on your supplies in your store, and then you're going out and getting a loan against those coupons, right? You can't go out and sell those on the open market because no one's going to want to buy all of them. And if you did sell them all, it's going to crash the price of it because there's just not enough of a demand for it, right? So another one of the major issues here was that there was a interconnectedness that went beyond what there should be in business between Alameda Research, which was, Sam Bankman-Fried wasn't technically the CEO, but he was kind of like the de facto CEO of Alameda. And so there was a lot of commingling of funds, and customer deposits that were meant for FTX were actually getting deposited into Alameda Research bank accounts. So kind of continuing with the timeline here. So Binance started to sell off these FTT tokens, which started to kind of precipitate this issue. Around the same time, I believe that the CEO of Alameda, which was Sam Bankman-Fried's ex-girlfriend, Caroline, what's her last name? I forget her last name. Anyway, it's escaping me. But she was kind of like publicly offering to buy these off of Binance, right? And so that kind of like threw up some red flags here. People are like, okay, well, you're kind of seeming a little bit desperate tweeting at Binance to try to buy these tokens. So then we saw on November 7th, the following the following day, FTX announces that they're having a liquidity crisis, right? And so they're saying that they're seeking a bailout from venture capitalists, and then they reach out to Binance directly. So the following day, November 8th, Binance says that's going to buy FTX, right, and all of their non-US businesses, pending a review of their financials. Well, the next day, they've looked under the hood for less than 24 hours, and they're already saying that they're going to walk away from this acquisition. So at this point, people are really like seeing the smoke and realizing that there's some major fires probably going on underneath the hood. On November 10th, the Bahamas, which is where FTX was headquartered, freezed all of the assets of FTX and their subsidiaries there. And Sam Bankman-Fried, who was living there, admits to the non-U.S. businesses' liquidity crisis and says that Alameda Research is going to be winding down. The following day, November 11th, Sam Bankman-Fried steps down as FTX CEO and is replaced by a court-appointed CEO with restructuring experience. So this was John J. Ray III, the guy who ran the bankruptcy proceedings for Enron. At this point, FTX filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. On the following day, so this is all happening, so just keep in mind that all of these events happened from between November 6th and November 11th. So there was, on November 5th, in the markets and in kind of the public sphere, FTX was operating, business as usual, right? And then on November 6th, Binance kind of kicks off this whole thing, and by November 11th, 5 days later, they had filed for bankruptcy. So on November 12th, FTX reports an alleged hack, and is suspected to be up to 477 million, and it moves all these digital assets to cold storage for security reasons. So this is a really key detail to keep in mind, because the same wallet that allegedly hacked this started moving funds right before the start of the trial. So if you think about just kind of like at the time, a lot of people were suspecting that this was an inside job, this hack, because it was done by someone who clearly had access to the private keys to these wallets. Because, as many of you might know, private keys can't be brute forced, right? It would take trillions of years to crack what a private key is. And so in order to have access to these wallets, someone would have to have access to these private keys. And so it's highly likely that whoever hacked FTX around this time was part of the inner circle or the upper echelon within the company. And so it's a little bit suspicious, and a little bit is an understatement. It's very suspicious that these funds are then getting moved a few days before the trial again. So with the same wallet address that hacked these. So as we know, everything is public on-chain data, so we can see these movements in real time. So then 6 days later, so we got a little bit of a breather, right, from the news of this for 6 days. The Bahamas took control of FTX's assets that were held in the Bahamas. And it was around this time, I forget the exact timeline, but SBF was originally planning on staying in the Bahamas and didn't really want to get extradited to the States. And then once he got into the Bahamian prison, that's when he decided he wanted to go back to the U.S. And so that's why the court case is now being held in New York, because he decided to get extradited back to the States. So on December 12th, SBF was arrested by Bahamian authorities. Okay, sorry, there it is, right there. I missed the timeline right there. So on December 12th, that happened. And then on the 22nd, he was released on a $250 million bond, which is the largest in history. So quite a series of events. And since then, we've had some revelations into kind of the inner workings of what was going on at FTX when all this was happening. And John J. Ray III released a report when they started the bankruptcy proceedings, just stating that there was absolutely zero corporate governance. So there was no formal board meetings or things like that. Some of the other interesting details were that like expense approvals were being done via emojis in a Slack channel. They they were buying houses with company funds in personal names outside of the country. So they would use company funds and then but not put it in the company name and buy a house for someone else. So there was just a lot of really sketchy, just kind of unprecedented stuff that was happening here. So now in the fraud case, I forget all of the charges, but I do know that a lot of it's wire fraud. It's conspiracy to commit wire fraud is one of them. Committing wire fraud is another one. I can pull up the whole list of charges here. But I think that just based on the initial facts that we've seen so far, it's pretty clear that you're not really supposed to be using customer funds to buy houses for people that don't even have the premise of being a company asset because they're not even in the company's name. I would think that would be pretty cut and dry there. One of the pieces of the defense that
that's the sort of thing that gets your CFO to quit because they're just like, I just give up. You can't do that.
But they didn't even have an accounting department. I forgot to mention that. FTX didn't have anyone in an accounting role in this $32 billion organization.
So what I was reading his blog post, and he says, while FTX International had a team dedicated to financials, that's all he says about it. But John Ray came out and said, no, there's no accounting department, there's no CFO. He notes that FTX had annual audited GAAP financials, and I think a lot of us were like, oh, well, that means then like it's fine, right? But once we saw the big web of companies, it's like, oh, FTX US was just this one little piece of that. And a lot of that risk was sitting in things that were outside of it. So those auditors had a really limited scope. But they've been sued now, right? Did the SEC file suit against them?
I'm not sure, but I know that they opened up another firm. They closed down Armanino, and I've heard people defend them, like, oh, like they had, by saying, hey, they have such a limited scope, they did what they set out to do. But I mean, ultimately, when you look at the quality of records or the lack of records entirely, and you see, like you say, this web of companies and the sketchiness here, it's hard to really say that they had no blame and that the scope was just so limited that they did what they were set up to do in the scope. I just think that it's not really fair to the auditing profession to let them off the hook like that.
I mean, there's a typical thing that happens when you have a bad client, right? It's a really difficult thing that happens. And what it is you have to decide, am I going to push through with this audit, say there's a scope limitation, give them material weaknesses, significant deficiency, what am I going to do? Or do we just recuse ourselves from this because it's that bad, right? And I stories that float around and my own personal experience of actually being in a situation where it was so bad we had to withdraw, right? Is that it's really easy to break under that pressure and just say, well, we can make do with this. Well, this isn't so bad. We'll just do a significant deficiency. We'll just kind of try to smooth it over. Well, management has told us they're going to handle it, and here's what they're going to do. So it doesn't need to go in our audit report. I mean, it doesn't mean that they, didn't, let's say, it doesn't mean they aren't responsible, for failing or like there's some kind of auditor negligence there. But I can have sympathy for the situation.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's because it like, I know what you mean. It's like there's a lot of pressure there to deliver for the client, and especially if you're if you're not the owner of the audit firm and you're just a worker there, it's hard to say no to your boss, or especially when you have pressure from above. So again, I'm not justifying them, but it's hard. It's also hard to have sympathy for the scale of this too, because it's not like this was a small company that was. This has global impacts, and I think the red flags were there and they were waving apparently. So Yeah. Anyways, it's interesting. So yeah, so I think kind of getting into the defense strategy, as Stacey and I before the call started, we were chatting a little bit about how kind of SBF had this media tour right as all this was happening, and he was just like getting anywhere he could get an interview, he was talking and yapping his trap, and probably to the chagrin of his lawyers or his legal team or his now current legal team, who probably wasn't hired at the time. He was talking about how and I quote, Stacey reminded me of this. He said, "Oh, first thing I want to do is admit that yes, I fucked up." It's like, the first thing you don't do on a on a tour when you're about to go on trial is admit fault. And
I
I
got this
think
whole blog post here
oh,
that I printed it out for progeny. Okay, so I'm gonna
yeah,
pass this down to people. Don't forget,
yeah,
SPF wrote a whole entire blog post that basically lays out why he's guilty. Okay.
yeah. But the key here, though, is right with fraud, you have to prove intent, and that's I think the biggest hurdle in any fraud case is proving that someone intended to do what
True.
because he can admit that he fucked up. He can admit that there was issues with what he did or whatever. But ultimately, if it wasn't his intent to defraud investors, he can get off scot free. And you have to, and it's not only that you have to convince one person of that beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to convince 12 jurors of that, and they all have to come to the same conclusion. So while there is a lot of evidence, and he did kind of shoot himself in the foot, more than just having shut his mouth, right? There is still an uphill battle for the prosecution here to get get him on these. However, there's enough charges coming against him. I think there's seven different counts of fraud. Hopefully they can get him on one of them because I don't think that he is beyond blame at all. And another kind of interesting aspect of this is that he was trying to intimidate some of the other people that could be potential witnesses against him. He released the diary of his girlfriend, who was the ex-girlfriend, who was the CEO of Alameda Research, in an attempt to try to intimidate her. And that's the reason why he's in a jail cell right now in Brooklyn, is because he was trying to intimidate witnesses through secure messaging and things like that. So, another interesting aspect here is that pretty much everyone from the C-level team is going to be testifying against him and has already pleaded guilty to charges for a reduced sentence. So I think, we're going to have some juicy stuff coming out, and I think that this is going to have an impact on the broader market because ultimately FTX has a lot of assets that it has under control. They're going to need to start selling in order to pay back investors and things like that. And I think that some of the revelations from this case may impact the crypto market in general based on additional facts that come out because, him being as big of a face of the industry as he was at this time, he was like crypto Jesus, right? Like he was seriously, like he was at that level of like being the guy of the face of the crypto industry, at least from the US perspective, donating to all these campaigns, apparently trying to bribe Trump out of running for office. So I think that he very much may have some kind of insider information that he may try to use or expose in order to get a lower sentence or something like that. So some of that could be a bombshell that could impact the industry as well.
I'll tell you what's going to be difficult. Here's a question I have for all of you.
Yeah.
Jury selection. Think about this. Like, to really understand the case, you have to know and understand what happens like in crypto. What's a crypto exchange? What was the relationship between him and Alameda? It's kind of technical, right?
Also not have an opinion on him already.
And I haven't met a single person in crypto who understands that, who's like, oh yeah, he's innocent.
Yeah.
So then, I mean, how do you get a good jury, right? Does it, if you have a jury primarily composed of people who do not really understand crypto beyond, it's just like, I don't know, digital money or something like that, right? if that's their conception of crypto and they don't understand what's going on here, does that increase the likelihood that they'll say, oh, well, he's innocent, he had no intent?
Yeah. I think.
Are we gonna start a pool? We're gonna
Yeah.
start a pool on the number of years he's gonna get.
How many counts is this convicted on?
What's the over under?
I got life.
No, it's always, they always go easy on white collar criminals, even when it's huge fraud.
Yeah.
Madoff got life, but he had people killing themselves, right?
Oh, what did? Yeah, Madoff. Has this FTX caused anybody to commit suicide? I haven't heard anything about that.
What is it with all these major like fraud cases or Ponzi schemes where they always have like the best last names, like, you know, Madoff and Bankman, and it's like what is it with it, like,
so,
you know,
sorry,
Bankman-Fried, like what's, you know, like
Madoff didn't get life. He got 150 years. So
that's why you know we're trustworthy, because we have names like Zorg, Santiago, and Ferris.
Yeah. It's not like Taylor Crisis, you know, or whatever, like Taylor, take your money, like, yeah, no, I think that, yeah, it's gonna be very interesting. The defense, it seems like the defense's strategy, at least kind of when it applies to what SBF was saying in that kind of press tour he did after all this happened, is that, you know, he was his prior legal team was telling him to act in good faith, and so, you know, I'm curious as to see their response to the prior legal team's response to that as well, because they're kind of getting thrown under the bus here as well. So I would assume that they're going to try to defend their reputation a little bit, but it blows my mind too that both of his parents are like legal scholars, and that he was like doing this press tour as well.
His father teaches ethics, legal ethics, I believe. So that's a real whopper that he teaches ethics, and here he's, according to the allegations, he's helping his son commit fraud and mishandle these funds. So
one other fact of the case that I thought was interesting, and this is just something that I remember when I was originally kind of talking about this almost a year ago now, was that in the terms of service, FTX was not allowed to lend out user funds that hadn't opted into the lending or borrowing, because they would give a yield on people if they wanted to enter like their borrow program or things like that, similar to what Celsius had and things like that. But users who didn't opt into that were not, their funds were not strictly not supposed to be moved. So the fact that they were moved, I think that's another kind of piece of this that could be a nail in the coffin of SBF here, is because he can plead ignorance to this happening all he wants, but ultimately, if you're the CEO, it's your responsibility to know. So, Stacey, if someone's role is to know these things and they say that they don't, does that kind of mean that they didn't have the intent, or do we? How can we take someone's word? Like, how far does someone's word go in a case like this? Because if he's the CEO, it's his job to know, right?
So intent is a legal determination, right?
Okay.
And a financial expert witness will not opine on intent. All we can do is report the facts and document, here's what we found in the documents. Now, sometimes those documents point to irrefutably, like, you had to mean it, right?
Yeah.
In his blog post, he wrote that he says we were transparent about market data, because you have to be, because blockchains are open, and access and fees and other things. He says we were not transparent, even internally, even to ourselves, about assets, margin, and positions and risk. which means he did not have regular information or any data feeds that would show him total client balances, total blockchain balances, the corresponding addresses, total bank and fiat balances that were in FTX's name, total bank and fiat balances that were in a payment processor's name, total margin position, total futures position size, and the amount and types of collateral that were utilized to support these, and the treatment of margin and risk on all accounts. You know what that information is? That's information that a CFO looks at every day, or a treasurer.
Yeah.
If you have a CFO and then you have a chief treasurer who focuses on cash management, and those two work very closely together to ensure the financial health of the entity. So
If they don't have a CFO,
I think the big lesson out of FTX that is really coming across, and I think a lot of people are getting this message, is that no, you can't ignore the accounting.
Yeah.
You can't ignore it.
Yeah.
Just because your bank balance is healthy does not mean that you're in a good position. Just because you earned X, $1 million in revenue and fees yesterday does not mean you're in a good position, because you need to understand what are my margins, what are my liabilities, what do I owe, what's in transit, hasn't settled yet, things like that. They were running a $1 billion business like a cash basis company.
Yeah.
Which is probably a statement only an accountant understands why that's awful.
Yeah. Can willful negligence rise to the can willful negligence be considered intent as well? That's my question, because I feel like
also a legal determination.
Yeah.
So it's in your best interest not to opine on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
All you can say is things like, well, here's the facts of the case, and the judge, the jury, the lawyers will make the legal determinations in court. Obviously, the opposing side is going to come out and say it's willful negligence, there was intent, there was maybe intent through like neglecting to do things, right? And then his defense is going to say, well, we were doing our best to manage it, and here's all the reasons why it was fine. And well, Sam Bankman-Fried, he trusted all of these people to do X, Y, and Z, and then according to his blog post, they didn't build out risk management, so therefore, everything going bad. It's tragic, but he didn't mean to do it.
Yeah, but I mean, I could set up a fund like Madoff and then just not have a risk management unit and just close my eyes and go la 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 la, and then say that I didn't have intent. It's shitty. That's why I think that it's like, I don't think it's necessarily a slam dunk that he's going to get. Do I think he did all these things, and do I think he screwed over a lot of people? Yeah, but it's going to be really hard to prove intent, I think.
What's the how many charges are there?
I think there's 7, but
7.
Here,
Brian, put a post up in the community about or do it on LinkedIn or something to be funny.
Which of the over? We got to get an over under. I bet you. So there's like a political website where you can bet on who's going to be. You can't bet if you're in the United States. People in other countries can bet on who's going to, win the presidency, who's going to be the Speaker of the House, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to Google and see if I can find one on SPF's over under on his time. I'm going to go with 50.
Okay.
50 years?
Yeah.
I want to know what the charges are and like what's the range of years on those charges before I come in with a bet.
Yeah, but I think they can stack them though. They're all going to be like 20 to 25, and then
yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like the range on, once you know the range, I mean.
So we got conspiracy to commit wire fraud on customers of FTX, wire fraud on customers of FTX, conspiracy to commit wire fraud on lenders to Alameda Research, wire fraud on lenders to Alameda Research, conspiracy to commit fraud on customers of FTX in connection with purchase and sale of derivatives, conspiracy to commit securities fraud on investors in FTX, conspiracy to commit money laundering.
It's expected to last 6 weeks. Wow.
Is that long or short? I don't know.
That's kind of short, actually.
Yeah.
It depends on how many witnesses they call.
It starts this week. That means it'll be running through the middle of November.
The jury has been selected.
Oh, really? Is that news just come out?
Yep. Opening arguments after lunch.
Really? They selected the jury that fast? I did not think that was going to happen that fast.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, cool and not cool. I'm just glad I didn't have any money in FTX.
He's going to be convicted of something. I mean, I just don't see how you get out of it. Like, you know, getting out of all of it. He'll get convicted of something. He's doing some time.
The totaled 8 original charges from CoinDesk is 115 years. So we'll get
So
something.
you're thinking he's gonna get the maximum sentence on 2.
What's that?
You're thinking your bet is that he's gonna get maximum sentence on 2?
I don't know. I mean, I have no legal basis. I'm just saying he's not as bad as Madoff. Madoff knew exactly what he was doing, right?
Yeah.
This guy, it's harder to prove he knew exactly what he was doing or the implications of it. So I don't see him getting the full 115, but I don't see. Yeah. But they're going to make an example that he's not going to get out till he's an old man. So
how old is he now? 25 or something?
It's insane how young he is.
Yeah, I know, man. All of them. The whole company was run by people under 25 or something like that. It's ridiculous.
But the other thing is he wasn't out there like trying to. He had all these expensive things, but it wasn't for him. It was more for everybody else. He was just worried about his beliefs, like trying to influence the future.
Yeah, that radical altruism or something like that.
Yeah. So.
Gotta do the ends justify the means. Let's talk to the Stanford ethics professor. What he thinks about that.
Obviously he does. Obviously he takes a more Machiavellian approach to things. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really surprised. Sorry, I'm like jumping in out of nowhere.
Oh, wow.
I'm like really surprised that he has as many counts as he has against him. I really just thought that he was going to lean on some people and like, you know what I mean? Get this reduced down to like 2 charges. And then they end up, he does a couple of years. No big deal. I'm really surprised. He must have not known anything, I guess, because he seems like the kind of guy that would just lean. But
oh, you mean like get a deal to get some of the charges removed by like offering up information about people in the industry?
Yeah. I mean, industry, politicians, maybe it's scarier to go after the politicians than just take the heat of all of these charges, but I don't know. Yeah, I was surprised that
Yeah, a lot of it is like the combination of conspiracy and then also the actual committing of the because like we've got 4 accounts that are all really are 2 fundamental things, right? Like wire fraud on FTX customers and then conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and the same thing with Alameda Research. So, it's they stack, right? It's crazy.
Yeah, so it's like I just looked it up on Google because I wanted to confirm, but conspiracy is really getting at the intent piece. So I would say that because we were talking about intent and how difficult it is to prove, right? And also how you could swing either way for many reasons. So the only thing on here that's not conspiracy are the 2 wire fraud charges. So it is possible that if they inject enough doubt, maybe they can knock it down to just the 2 wire fraud charges, in which case I'm going to go with he's going to get 40 years.
Yeah, with the 2 wire, that makes sense.
That sounds like a good number. And the feds give it out by months, so it sounds crazy. They'll be like 485 months.
It's not a good number for him, but it's crazy.
Interesting.
But if they still own any Bitcoin, I mean, imagine it. He'll just be in jail getting paid for with our tax dollars when he gets out. What do you think Bitcoin will be worth in 40 years?
Oh, man. a lot more than it is now.
So he wins. Either
Yeah.
way, it's like not
Yeah.
real. I mean,
It's like the ultimate
jail sucks. Okay, nobody's saying it doesn't suck, but like,
He's got like the ultimate hodling strategy.
Right. Go to jail, 40 years. Can't settle.
He'll be the richest
I've
man in
been
the world.
calling jail
Imagine he's
sentence
the
people's
richest man in the
profit.
world from a jail cell.
Yeah.
That's probably
That's
what it
fine.
was. He wasn't willing to give up the Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I bet if he was willing to give that up, all these charges go away.
hmm
Maybe.
Yeah, you can save that, bookmark that website as well. CoinDesk has a great full coverage. They have like a whole mini site dedicated to it. So it goes back pretty far.
Yeah, Bernie Madoff's former lawyer is saying that crypto knowledge is unlikely to play a role in SBF trial.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Cool. Well, those are the main things I wanted to highlight. Just kind of the initial discussions. We'll follow this as the case unfolds over the next 6 weeks or so. But it'll be definitely interesting to see what comes of this, and I'm sure that we're going to get some revelations coming out of this that are going to be surprising, even under the circumstances. So, yeah, thank you all for joining, and if anyone else has anything else to input.
Oh, interesting. Hey, here's an interesting story off of CoinDesk, and it's Bernie Madoff's former lawyer saying crypto knowledge unlikely to play a role in the SBF trial. That would explain then why they got a jury so quickly. Where's the chat here? I was going to just drop this link in for this story. Because I mean, I guess with the Madoff trial, maybe the jury didn't need a big fancy knowledge of securities law and hedge funds and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's a video. It's not a story, so you have to watch it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you guys all for joining. Good to be back and back in the swing of things, and I'm just getting caught up now. But yeah, had a baby girl on Tuesday of last week. Healthy mama, have healthy baby. So
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. So baby Omi is here now. So after we're finishing up the house this week as well. So we'll be closing a couple of chapters here, and I'll be kind of happy to settle down a little bit more and get out of the chaos. So anyways, thank you guys all for joining, and we'll see you guys next week.